Hi everyone, Chris Natzke here with Black Belt Leadership Speaking and Coaching with your Mind of a Champion Tip of the Week live on Facebook. Well, most of you who know me know that I started martial arts at the young age of 10. And, like most young boys at that age, I had my sports heroes. But unlike those heroes coming from traditional sports like football and baseball and basketball, my heroes were those in the martial arts. People like Bill Superfoot Wallace, who was the best kicker in the world at the time and a world champion. Hi, Brian Cayley. Good to have you join me. Who later became my instructor. People like Joe Lewis and Jeff Smith in the martial art world. Those were my heroes growing up. And there was Chuck Norris. Chuck Norris. Now, most of you who think about Grandmaster Norris, you think about Walker, Texas Ranger and all the movies that he made in the 70s and 80s. But when I was coming up through the martial art ranks, he was known as a world champion karate practitioner. Now, and that's how I knew him. That's how he became one of my idols. Now, a little bit different, the style of martial art and competition that he participated in were Lewis and Wallace competed in what's called kickboxing, which is they would actually fight each other to knockout. What Mr. Norris competed in was sport karate or point karate, which meant that the two combatants would come at each other. They'd throw, quote unquote, a controlled technique, and whoever landed first, the judges would watch, and then they would award them points. So the margin of error in winning and losing in that kind of competition can be very, very slim. And so obviously in that type of competition, every once in a while, Chuck Norris would lose a match. Now, this brought me back thinking about this back to the early 70s or the mid 70s when I was a huge fan of Mr. Norris and he came out with his first book. In fact, it's still right here, published in 1975. It's called Winning Tournament Karate. And all those years ago, I remember when I read it, there was one passage that really stuck in my mind and in my heart. And it was in the foreword or the preface by his student, John Robertson. Now, I told you that, in this competition that Chuck Norris would do, every once in a while he would lose a match. But Robertson talks about Norris's confidence. And he said that he often would tell him that he never lost a match. Well, Robertson knew that he had definitely lost because he had seen him. But then he quotes Norris saying this. He says, "A man only loses a match when he broods over his loss. But if he can learn from that loss, it becomes a major victory and puts you one more rung up the ladder of achievement." I don't call that losing. So I remember at 12 years old how deeply that hit me, and it still impacts me today. So I'd like us to consider, now that most of us are in our adult lives, is how do we deal with defeat? And can we turn those situations into actual victories for us? And I've got three things I'd like us to consider and things that I'm reminding of myself as well. And the first one is the ability to forgive ourselves when we see defeat. One of the things that can be the very worst is when things don't turn out the way we want them to. For me, it was 1998. I competed in the National Taekwondo Championships and I beat everyone all the way up to the finals. And I scouted my opponent for the final match and I felt super confident I was going to be able to win that match as well. Well, you know what happened? I lost. I got beaten by a craftier fighter. I wasn't physically beaten, but he knew the rules well and he was able to outpoint me. And that loss stuck with me for months, until one day I had to say to myself, okay, enough. I have to forgive myself from this. Because if I wasn't going to allow myself to be forgiven and forgive myself for that loss, I was going to keep getting beaten up every day, but not by my opponent, but by myself. So where do you have an opportunity to forgive yourself for a past loss or defeat? Number two is identify the blessings that go within that. And I know that you might hear me say that and go, wow, sometimes defeat can be awful. In fact, I know what losing is all about. I played on a Northwestern football team in the 1980s. We broke the record for the most consecutive losses in major college football history. 38 consecutive losses. I think it might have even gone to 42. And that's until Columbia University broke the record. Thank you, Columbia. But the fact of the matter is, I know how much defeats can hurt. But the fact of the matter is there's always a blessing and a lesson in there for us. in my own personal life, going through divorce after a 26-year relationship was incredibly painful. But when I look back at it now, I can see the lessons that I learned from it, and it's actually brought me to the work that I'm doing today. So in essence, it really became a blessing. So where can you find the blessings in your losses? And then finally, number 3, take action on the things you can control and correct, and forget the rest. So in 1999, I went back to compete in the National Taekwondo Championships. And when I started my training for that, you know that loss was still in my mind. But after a while, I said to myself, I need to just forget it and use it as fuel, use those lessons that I learned as fuel to direct me and to change my strategy. But then it allowed me to go and win that tournament. So it's where can we in our own lives take those situations that we've learned from the defeat and now look at the things we can really control and just focus on those. Because if you're still focusing on the past, you can't move forward. So there are my 3 tips for us. How do we go through life? How do we go through business? How do we go through our relationships to know that we never really have to lose? We can always win if we learn from those situations. So there you have it, my friends. This has been our message for this week. As always, I love it when people comment and share, like, love, whatever you want to do. And if you have subjects that you'd like to hear me speak about in the future, please send those ideas along as well. But once again, thanks so much for joining me on this edition, and we'll see you next time on the Mind of a Champion Tip of the Week.